I'm Anna Mitchell, 32, and for most of my life, I've gotten used to smiling through gritted teeth at family events. Weddings, baby showers, anniversaries. If there was champagne and passive aggression, you could count on the Mitchells to make an appearance. But I never expected the whisper that would change everything to come wrapped in a flute of sparkling wine and a smirk. Matthew's wedding was supposed to be beautiful. And it was. Terracotta linens, draped fairy lights, and acres of Cabernet vines glowing under the late afternoon sun. The vineyard was a postcard. Exactly the kind of fairy tale my cousin deserved. My daughter Sophie was off somewhere doodling on the backs of reception menus, lost in her 9-year-old world of color and whimsy. And I was trying to be invisible. As usual. Until I heard Aunt Elaine. She leaned toward some guest I didn't recognize, probably one of Matthew's college friends. Her glass of champagne sparkled as she gestured with it lazily, her voice just loud enough for me to catch as I walked past behind her. Well, Sophie doesn't really count as family. It wasn't even bitter. It was casual. Effortless. As if she'd said, "It might rain tomorrow." My steps faltered, just for a second, before I made it to the row of bar tables near the arbor. My fingers clenched around my own glass so tightly I was sure it might shatter. The laughter around us didn't falter. The music drifted on. Someone popped another cork in the distance and a cheer went up. But something inside me cracked. I stood there, back rigid, facing the vineyard like I was admiring the view, while my ears burned and my heart pounded hard against my ribs. Sophie doesn't really count as family. God, how many times had I heard versions of that sentiment since she was born, since I showed up pregnant at 19 with no ring, no explanations, and no apology. My family had always smiled politely and made room at the table. But never in their hearts. Elaine's voice trailed off into another anecdote. This time about her son's medical school interviews, while I stayed frozen under the pergola. I looked down at my champagne. The bubbles rose and fizzed with cheerful indifference, mocking me. The thing about being talked about like you're not there is, it teaches you how to disappear, how to perfect the art of looking unbothered. I could win awards in that by now. But something about the way she said it, like Sophie was an asterisk on our family tree, stripped me raw. She was 9. She drew hearts around our names and made birthday cards with glitter glue. She loved everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. And yet, Elaine had reduced her to an afterthought. A technicality. A part of me wanted to throw the champagne in her face. Another part wanted to laugh like it didn't matter. But instead, I stood still and swallowed hard. I'd been doing that for years, swallowing hard, smiling politely, shrinking into the corners. But not this time. This time, something started to rise. Something that tasted like fire. I watched Sophie from across the courtyard. She sat cross-legged on a stone bench under a twisted olive tree, completely absorbed in her sketchbook. Her tongue poked out in concentration as her pencil moved in quick, confident strokes. Every now and then she'd glance up at the scenery, the rows of grapes, the arch of the arbor, the tiny twinkling lights above. Her hair was slightly mussed from running with the other kids earlier, but she looked so content, so peaceful. I envied that peace. Just behind me, someone coughed and murmured, "She's gotten so big," followed by a pause thick enough to carry the unspoken rest. I didn't turn to see who said it. I didn't need to. The cadence was familiar. It was the same tone I'd heard at every family gathering since Sophie was born. That mixture of reluctant admiration and thinly veiled judgment wrapped up in a polite smile. I knew that tone. I'd been studied under it like a microscope slide for over a decade. One of Matthew's groomsmen drifted over to grab a drink and smiled at me politely. "Cute kid. Yours?" "Yeah," I nodded, forcing a smile. "That's Sophie." "Nice," he said before moving on. I watched his back retreat, the way his suit barely wrinkled, the ease of his step. For him, the moment passed. For me, it stayed. Behind the buffet table, Aunt Marie and Uncle George huddled with their plates, eyes flicking over to Sophie and then to me. I caught the flash of a glance before they looked away, pretending to be absorbed in coleslaw. The second their mouths started moving again, I didn't have to wonder what they were saying. I'd seen that look 1,000 times since I was 19. At Aunt Lily's engagement party, At my sister Beth's baby shower, at every Christmas dinner where I brought Sophie and no man, no ring, no explanation. The look that said, poor Anna. She had potential. She could have gone far. Then she had that baby. Sophie giggled, waving at a little boy in suspenders who ran past with a juice box. She returned to her drawing, utterly unbothered. I wanted to wrap my arms around her and build a wall between her and the world. Between her and this family. I sipped my champagne slowly, letting it sting the back of my throat. The laughter around me swelled, light and carefree. I didn't belong in it. I never had. Even when I smiled, even when I nodded and laughed on cue, I felt the distance. It was the way the women talked about careers and vacations and yoga studios, and how I stayed quiet. It was the way the men avoided eye contact when they asked how I was doing, like my answer might be too real. I looked back at Sophie. She'd drawn a heart between two stick figures. One labeled, me. The other, Mommy. She was coloring it in with a pink crayon she'd pulled from her pocket. She didn't see the whispers, the sidelong glances, the hierarchy. Not yet. And I hated how deeply I wanted to keep it that way. The clink of silverware on china pulled me back to the long table set beneath the pergola, vines trailing above like something out of a Tuscan postcard. Everyone had taken their seats, toasts made, laughter thick in the air like summer wine. I was sandwiched between my cousin's wife, Danielle, who'd brought up the same skincare line twice in 5 minutes, and an empty chair Sophie had abandoned in favor of drawing fireflies. Across from me, Aunt Elaine laughed too hard at something Uncle Robert said. I stared at the centerpiece, a low bowl of floating gardenias, and let the sound wash over me like static. Then it hit me. That smell, gardenia, brought me straight back to Beth's engagement party 7 years ago. The same flowers, different arrangement, same table energy. I was 25, Sophie was 2, and I had spent the entire event chasing her around the country club lawn, while my mother played hostess and Elaine made backhanded comments about girls who play house too soon. Beth had worn a champagne satin dress. Everyone cooed over her ring. There had been a slideshow. I'd stood in the back, holding Sophie on my hip while my mother introduced Beth as our shining star. Someone asked me if I was working. I'd lied and said yes, just to avoid explaining the overnight shifts at the diner. The look of relief on their face when I said graphic design still haunted me. Another clink of glass brought me back to the present. Someone was making a toast. I raised my glass on instinct, didn't hear a word. It was the same again at Cousin Sarah's baby shower 2 years later. I'd shown up with Sophie in tow, a neatly wrapped gift from the clearance aisle and a smile that didn't quite fit. Everyone had opinions about sleep schedules and organic cotton onesies. I kept quiet. When Sophie knocked over a tray of cupcakes, the entire room paused. My aunt muttered, "Some kids are just more energetic." I apologized. Cleaned it up, we left early. Back at the vineyard, Danielle turned to me, eyes gleaming. "So, are you still doing the single mom thing?" "That's strong of you." I blinked. "The single mom thing?" I repeated slowly. "Yeah, you know, managing on your own. I couldn't do it." She laughed like it was a compliment. I nodded once, tight-lipped. The muscles in my jaw ached from how often they were forced to pretend I wasn't quietly drowning. Another toast went up. More laughter. Elaine's voice carried over the table, bragging about her son's upcoming medical internship. She called it legacy stuff. Her eyes didn't meet mine. I glanced over at Sophie again, still under that olive tree, still drawing, still safe, for now. But I knew the pattern. The way this family forgot you if you didn't follow their script. The way they pretended to include you, while always making sure you knew just how easily they could write you out. And I'd let them. For years. But something in my chest was beginning to shift. The weight of all those moments, Beth's ring, Sarah's bump, Danielle's tone, was stacking into something else. Something that felt suspiciously like rage. The sun dipped below the hills, and the vineyard shifted from golden warmth to soft shadow. String lights blinked to life overhead, casting a gentle glow over the patio. The air had cooled just enough to raise goosebumps on my arms. I'd just stepped away from the table. Needed a moment, just one moment, to breathe. To stop smiling. to loosen my shoulders before they locked in place from holding everything in for too long. I made my way toward the bar, where they were topping off glasses with that unnaturally sweet rosé. That's where she found me. "Oh, Anna," Elaine purred, appearing at my side like an expensive ghost. She clutched her wine glass like a prop, eyes already scanning the crowd, calculating her next move. I turned just enough to acknowledge her without encouragement. "Hi, Elaine." "I have to say," she started, voice syrupy, "Sophie's really blossomed. I mean, considering." "Considering?" I asked, not moving. She smiled at me with her teeth. "Given the circumstances," she said, like it was obvious. "You've done the best you could, really. It's admirable." I stared at her. "Thank you," I said slowly, knowing full well it wasn't a compliment. She took a sip, still not looking at me. "You know, it's easy to get stuck when things don't go the way we plan. But you've managed. That's something." It was always like this with Elaine. Her words dressed up like gifts, only to find sharp edges inside the wrapping. I used to try and argue, to defend my life, my choices. But I'd learned that Elaine didn't deal in conversations, only declarations. "I appreciate your concern," I said, my voice even. I turned my body slightly, an attempt to signal the end of the exchange. She stepped in closer, undeterred. "Of course, it's just such a shame. You had such promise in high school. Weren't you going to go into architecture? Or was it journalism?" "Graphic design," I said flatly. "Right, right," she nodded. "So creative. But life had other plans, I suppose." She touched my arm lightly, as if she were comforting me. "At least you're still close to family." I smiled, tight and cold. "It's the least I can do, given the circumstances." That made her blink. A tiny flicker. But she recovered fast. "Well? Matthew's ceremony was just beautiful, wasn't it?" she asked, as if the last 30 seconds hadn't happened. I nodded, sipping my drink, pulse hammering in my ears. She turned to go, her smile already resetting for her next victim. And I stood there, feeling the sting of her words as they burrowed deeper than I wanted to admit. I wasn't just tired of Elaine. I was tired of this entire performance. The dress, the fake laughs, the way I had to keep swallowing pieces of myself to survive an evening around people who never saw me as whole, to begin with. I set my glass down on the bar. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt angry. I had just turned away from the bar, the echo of Elaine's syrupy venom still trailing in my ears, when I saw Sophie running toward me. Her arms flailed in that uninhibited way only kids have. Elbows too high, knees too fast for her feet to keep up. Her sketchbook flopped under one arm like a soft-winged bird. "Mommy," she called, breathless. I crouched just in time to catch her. She threw her arms around my waist, nearly knocking me off balance, and pressed her cheek into the fabric of my dress. I could smell the sun in her hair, the faint hint of grass and lemonade. "Look," she said, already flipping pages. "I made a new one." I followed her small finger as it traced over stick figures. There were only two. One tall, with a triangle dress and a crown of scribbled curls. The other, smaller, with pink shoes and hearts floating above her head. Both were labeled. "Mommy," she said proudly, tapping the taller one. "And that's me," she added, tapping herself. She'd drawn us holding hands. Above us floated a banner, "OUR Family." All caps, bright purple crayon. No dad, no aunts, no cousins. Just us. Just joy. My throat tightened. "You like it?" she asked, squinting up at me, her smile lopsided from missing teeth. I nodded, afraid to speak. She kept flipping. There were other drawings, one of us baking cookies, one of our cat who she'd drawn with a bow tie, one of the two of us flying in a hot air balloon over a field of hearts. But it was that first one I kept staring at. We looked happy. Because we were. Not here. Not in this vineyard wrapped in judgment and careful smiles, but in the quiet corners of our real life. In our tiny apartment where the sink drips, where dinner sometimes means cereal, where bedtime stories get interrupted by impromptu dance parties. There, we're a family. I pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "It's perfect," I whispered, "just like you." She beamed, tucking the sketchbook against her chest like a treasure. You want to come back and draw with me? I have purple glitter pens now, she said, already tugging at my hand. In a minute, I said, smoothing her hair. I'll be right there. She nodded and skipped off, her curls bouncing. I stood there for a long time after she disappeared back under the tree. I held that image in my mind. The banner, the stick figures, the hearts. She hadn't drawn absence, she'd drawn love. She hadn't even noticed who wasn't in the picture. Because for her, nothing was missing. And that did something to me. Broke something open. Maybe I hadn't failed. Maybe I hadn't ruined my life. Maybe I'd built something quietly, steadily, that no one in that vineyard would ever understand. And maybe that was enough. The gravel crunched under my bare feet as I wandered past the last row of vines, heels dangling from my fingers like dead weight. The wedding music had faded behind me, replaced by the soft hum of crickets and the gentle rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. It was darker here. Away from the laughter, the lights, the carefully arranged tables where everyone knew exactly where they belonged. I needed air. I needed silence. I needed to stop pretending. Elaine's voice echoed in my head, that sing-song cruelty wrapped in sugar. You've done the best you could, given the circumstances. And then Sophie's drawing. The crown. The hearts. The simplicity of being seen by someone who didn't need to qualify my worth. It was too much. I stopped walking and sank onto the edge of a low stone wall, letting my shoes drop beside me. My fingers curled into my lap, nails pressing into skin until it stung. It helped, somehow. A small, tangible pain I could control. I'd spent so many years like this. Holding my breath, smoothing my dress, lowering my voice. I'd learned how to take up as little space as possible. To become invisible enough that the whispers didn't land quite so hard. It was easier that way. Safer. But it hadn't protected me. Not really. Because no matter how still I stood, they never stopped looking at me like I was the exception to the family. Like I was a side note. A cautionary tale. I thought back to the early days with Sophie. The nights she cried and I rocked her until dawn with cracked nipples and zero clue what I was doing. The times I skipped meals so she wouldn't notice we were broke. The jobs I'd taken. The doors I'd knocked on. The times I'd swallowed my pride and asked for help even when it burned like acid in my throat. No one here saw that. They saw a girl who had a baby too young and never quite made it back. They saw the shadows of who I could have been if I'd followed the rules. But Sophie didn't see that. She never had. To her, I was enough. More than enough. I was magic and home and safety all rolled into one. And God, I'd spent years letting people treat us like we were something broken. Tears welled up, hot and uninvited. I blinked them back, furious at myself for letting them come. Not here, not now, but something inside was shifting, slowly, painfully, like a bone long dislocated finally being pushed back into place. I had never stood up for us, not really. I'd smiled and nodded and let them define the terms of my existence. I'd let Elaine pat me on the head with her thinly veiled pity, let the others pretend Sophie was some minor miracle I'd somehow not messed up. I'd survived. But I hadn't lived. Not yet. The lights from the reception flickered in the distance. I could hear faint clapping, someone making another toast. Let them. Out here, in the dark, barefoot and finally still, I felt something rise in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. And under that, resolve. I didn't mean to end up by the smoking area. I hate the smell. But I guess I was drawn to the quiet, the way the smoke curled into the night like secrets let loose. I leaned against the trellis, eyes closed, letting the cold of the stone seep into my back and remind me I was still here. Still solid. Still me. That's when I heard heels clicking, fast and chaotic, like someone marching off from a scene they regretted. Jesus, I swear, if Elaine tells that story about her Provence trip one more time, I'm going to fake a seizure. I opened my eyes. Julia Stanton, second cousin. Reformed wild child. Ex-punk, two-time divorcee, current graphic novelist with a laugh that could clear a room or start a riot depending on her mood. She stopped when she saw me, wine glass already half empty and her eyeliner just slightly smudged. Well, well, she said, raising her glass like a sword. if it isn't the ghost of family expectations past. I blinked. That's supposed to be me? She shrugged. You're brooding under string lights at a wedding? It's either that or a rom-com setup. I smiled in spite of myself. Hey, Julia. She walked over and plopped down next to me, her silk dress catching on a splinter in the bench, but she didn't even flinch. That's the thing about Julia. She's never been the flinching type. You look like someone who just got hit with an Elaine special, she said. I didn't answer, but my silence was enough. Oh, honey. She took a sip. Was it the one about how not everyone needs to be a star? Or the we all make choices monologue? Something like that. Julia leaned back, letting her head tip against the trellis. You know she's been poisoning every family gathering since Reagan was president, right? I laughed, the sound surprising me. She's like a mosquito in pearls, Julia continued. Tiny. Persistent. Somehow always there, buzzing around your head at the exact moment you start to feel okay. I looked at her. How do you deal with it? She glanced over, serious for a moment. I stopped giving a damn what they thought. I have a kid, I said quietly. And that kid drew a picture with just you and her and hearts, she replied. So whatever you're doing, it's working. I looked down at my hands. I've let them talk about me like I'm this mistake. Like Sophie's some accidental detour instead of the best thing that's ever happened to me. Julia nodded slowly. That's the thing, they don't get it. They never will. But Sophie does. And that matters more than their stale wine and passive aggression. She paused. You ever think about saying something? Like actually saying something? I blinked at her. I'm not talking about throwing a drink in Elaine's face, though I fully support that, for the record. I mean using your voice. Standing up. For Sophie. For you. I opened my mouth to say I couldn't, that it wouldn't make a difference, that it wasn't worth it. But then I saw Sophie in my mind again. The drawing. The hearts. And for once, I didn't feel so small. I've thought about it, I said softly. Julia raised her glass again. Then think harder. And when you do it, make sure I'm holding the camera. She grinned. And God help me. I grinned back. The lights had dimmed just enough to make everything feel more magical than it really was. The vineyard had slipped into its final act, twinkling string lights, soft jazz blending with cicadas, laughter rising like smoke from too many wine glasses. The DJ tapped the mic. All right, folks, he said with a grin, time for some love. If you've got a toast, come on up. Let's send the bride and groom into married life with stories, blessings, and, if we're lucky, mild embarrassment. Laughter rippled through the crowd. One by one, the usual suspects stepped up. Cousins, college friends, an old coach. They clinked glasses, shared anecdotes, made everyone laugh and wipe away misty tears. I stood near the edge of the dance floor, Julia by my side, both of us holding our drinks like shields. This is always where Elaine thrives, Julia muttered. Watch for the jab wrapped in a joke. It's her signature move. I didn't have to wait long. Elaine stepped up to the mic like she was stepping onto a Broadway stage. She beamed, her posture pristine, her voice syrup smooth. Well, she began, it's been such a beautiful day, truly. Matthew and Rachel, you're just radiant. And I couldn't be prouder to call you family. A pause. A beat too long. She turned, just slightly, scanning the crowd like she was delivering a TED Talk instead of a toast. You know, she continued, family means everything to us. Real family, I mean. It hit like a slap, subtle enough to go unnoticed by anyone not paying attention. But pointed. Sharp. Designed like a dagger with a smile. The laughter that followed was instant. Familiar. Comforting for those in the inner circle. Dismissive of those outside it. Julia's head snapped toward me. Oh, hell no. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. My heart pounded in my chest, slow and heavy, like it was counting down. Elaine prattled on, toasting Matthew's incredible career and Rachel's grace under pressure, dropping names and memories that made it clear who was in the circle and who wasn't. I stood there, glass shaking slightly in my hand, feeling that old familiar pull. Be quiet. Blend in. Don't make waves. But Sophie's drawing burned in my memory. her smile, her trust. When Elaine finally stepped down, satisfied and glowing, the DJ reached for the mic again. Anyone else want to share some love? And just like that, everything in me stood up at once. My voice, my backbone, my rage. I turned to Julia, who was already smiling like she knew exactly what was happening. Go, she whispered, say it. I walked toward the DJ booth before I could second guess it. The crowd buzzed, a few heads turned. Elaine, back at her seat, sipped her wine with smug confidence. She didn't know, but she was about to. I stood at the edge of the crowd, just a few feet from the DJ booth, hands damp, lungs too tight. The mic was there, black and slick and harmless looking, but it felt like a weapon, like something I wasn't sure I had the right to hold. What was I doing? Seriously, what was I thinking? A toast? To what? Shame? Resentment? The invisible seat I've been assigned at every family table since I was 19? I stared at the floorboards, willing my feet to stay planted, but everything inside me screamed retreat. Just walk away. Let them win. Keep the peace. Maybe I'd imagined Elaine's dig. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe I was about to become the punchline to a story they'd retell for years. Remember when Anna tried to make Matthew's wedding about herself? God. This was a mistake. I turned away from the booth. My throat burned, my legs wobbled. I started drifting back through the crowd, eyes low, breath shallow. I just needed to find Sophie. I'd grab our coats, we'd leave quietly. No scene, no spotlight. But then I saw her. Across the lawn, under the glowing grapevine trellis, Sophie was twirling in the grass with a group of other kids. Her laugh carried across the vineyard like a bell. Bright, unself-conscious, full of wonder. She spun with arms wide, face up to the sky, that yellow sundress catching the last bits of twilight. My feet stopped. She didn't know. She had no idea that someone had called her less than. That someone had measured her against a pedigree she was never meant to match. That people in this very crowd had smiled at her and me, only to erase us the moment we walked away. She had no idea. But she would, one day. Unless I changed the story. Unless I said something now. Unless I made them look her in the eye and see not a footnote, not a mistake, not a whispered, well, you know, but a child. My child. The center of my world. I watched her laugh, free and fearless, and I knew. Walking away wasn't safety, it was surrender. And I wasn't doing that anymore. I don't know what force pulled my eyes back to her, but there she was, mid-twirl, frozen, like something invisible had passed through her chest and into mine. Sophie was staring at me. Her little arms fell to her sides as she tilted her head, curious. Her sketchbook was tucked under one elbow, and her curls glowed gold in the overhead lights. Her brows furrowed, just barely, the way they always did when she could tell something was wrong, even when I was trying to fake it. And I'd gotten good at faking it. I'd smiled through job interviews after getting eviction notices. I'd said, I'm fine, more times than I could count, even when I was too tired to cry. I'd learned how to shrink every part of myself down so I wouldn't take up too much space in rooms like this. But Sophie never bought it. Not fully. Not when it mattered. She gave me this look sometimes. This quiet, steady gaze like she was holding my soul between her palms, deciding whether I was telling the truth. And I wasn't. Not yet. Not until I said it. All of it. I felt my breath catch. She gave me the tiniest nod. Not dramatic, not cartoonish, just a yes, a permission, a question, a plea. Do it. I mouthed, I love you, and she grinned, toothy and radiant, like I'd handed her the moon. That was the moment I stopped questioning. This wasn't about me anymore. It never really had been. This was about that drawing she made. The one where we were smiling under a banner that said, OUR family. The one without a dad. The one without anyone else's approval. The one full of hearts. That was her truth. And I was about to make it mine, too. I turned back toward the DJ booth. My knees were shaking, my palms slick. But my heart? My heart was locked in place. The DJ was still laughing with a guest, mic in hand, relaxed and unaware of the quiet rebellion about to land at his feet. I walked up to him, eyes steady. Can I say something? I asked. He paused. Looked at me. Then, with a little shrug and a surprised smile, he handed me the mic. Of course, he said. Your family, right? Right. I gripped the microphone, cold metal warming under my fingers. Yes, I am. The microphone felt heavier than it looked. I stepped into the circle of lights, the crowd turning toward me with a ripple of curiosity. Conversations paused, wine glasses lowered. Somewhere in the back, someone muttered, "Is that Anna?" I cleared my throat. Elaine's eyes found me first. That polished little smile tightened just enough to register. She tilted her head, a picture of composed anticipation. I knew what they all expected. A sweet toast. A forgettable anecdote. A few seconds of polite applause before the next person took the mic and brought the mood back to safety. But I hadn't come for polite. I took a deep breath and lifted my chin. I want to say something tonight, I began, my voice steadier than I thought it would be. Not just about the bride and groom, though they're lovely and I wish them every happiness, but about someone else. Someone who wasn't invited to speak, but who changed my life forever. The buzz shifted. Eyes darted. Elaine stiffened. I want to toast my daughter, Sophie. Silence. Not shock, just confusion. Like I'd veered off script and everyone was waiting for me to get back on track. I didn't. When I found out I was pregnant at 19, people acted like it was the end of a story. Like I'd just permanently footnoted myself out of every family photo, every milestone. They called it a mistake. They whispered. They distanced themselves. And I understood. I stayed small. I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. I paused. The air hung heavy. I could hear the clinking of silverware stopping, the hush of breath being held. But what they didn't see, I said, eyes sweeping the crowd, was what that little girl gave me. Sophie gave me purpose. She gave me joy when there was none. She gave me art and wonder and a reason to show up every single day when it would have been easier not to. A murmur rippled through the guests. One woman dabbed her eye. A man cleared his throat. She's not just my daughter. She's my hero. She's my family. And tonight, I want to raise a glass, not just to the couple, but to the kind of love that doesn't care about timelines or judgment or last names. I raised my champagne. To Sophie. The best thing I've ever done. And just like that, I said it. I said what they'd all avoided, what I'd been too afraid to say. The truth. The words hung there like a final note, hovering in the warm vineyard air, suspended between the flicker of candlelight and the hush that followed. No one moved. A few guests blinked, unsure if it was over. Unsure if they were allowed to clap. This wasn't the speech they'd expected. It wasn't safe. It wasn't rehearsed. It was raw and uninvited and completely true. Elaine's smile had frozen. Her eyes were hard now, glittering in the candlelight like polished stone. She hadn't expected me to speak at all, let alone say that. I glanced toward the kids' area, and there she was. Sophie. She had stopped mid-step, her glitter pen scattered on the grass behind her. Her arms were wrapped around her sketchbook like it was something holy. Her mouth hung open slightly, eyes wide, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Then she started walking. Past the kids, past the twinkle lights. Across the dance floor, where the adults had gone silent, watching her like a comet. She reached me just as I lowered the mic, and without saying a word, she threw herself into my arms. Her little body collided with mine, soft and trembling. I dropped to my knees right there in the middle of the crowd and held her, burying my face in her curls. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you more," I choked out, my voice cracking on the truth. The applause started slow. One pair of hands, Julia's I think, clapping slow and strong. Then another. Then more. It rolled across the vineyard like a wave. Genuine, reluctant, surprised, but growing. Even the DJ stood, hands lifted in appreciation. People looked around at each other, unsure but still clapping. Because sometimes, even if it makes you uncomfortable, you know when something real has happened. Sophie pulled back just enough to look at me, eyes bright, cheeks wet. "You talked about me," she whispered, in the microphone. "Yeah," I said, brushing her hair back from her face. "Because you matter. more than anyone here has ever dared to say out loud. Her smile was shy, proud, a little stunned. She looked around at the clapping crowd, and for once, she didn't look small. She looked like she belonged. Elaine stood frozen, arms crossed, her wine untouched. Her lips were a perfect line, but she said nothing, not a word. Because what could she say? The story had already changed. The crowd had already heard the truth. And the girl she thought didn't count was now at the center of it all. For once, I hadn't waited for permission. I'd taken the mic. And I wasn't sorry. For a moment, it felt like the entire vineyard was holding its breath. No glasses clinked, no chairs shifted, no one laughed or whispered or dared to look away. Just me, Sophie, and the thick, trembling silence we had cracked wide open. Then came the sound. Applause. Slow at first. Just Julia's hands, strong and steady, clapping with the kind of pride that didn't need words. Then someone else joined. Then another. And then the whole damn crowd was standing. Hands moving. Faces softening. Some even crying. It wasn't the thunderous kind of applause that follows a showstopper or a punchline. It was something deeper. Something real. A recognition. Of truth. Of love. Of a woman who had finally spoken out in a room that had spent years asking her to be quiet. Sophie looked around, her face lighting up in wonder. "They're clapping for me," she whispered, eyes shining like she'd just seen magic for the first time. "They're clapping because they finally see you," I whispered back, my arms around her shoulders, holding her like she might float away. And just like that, the weight on my chest I'd carried for years. Since that first night I held her alone in a hospital room, since every family event where we stood on the outside looking in began to lift. Julia made her way through the crowd, dodging centerpieces and champagne flutes, and threw one arm around me, the other ruffling Sophie's curls. "That," she said with a grin, "was a goddamn masterpiece." Sophie giggled, cheeks pink. "Can I draw it later?" "Oh, you better," Julia said. "Draw it big." With glitter. Behind her, I caught Elaine. She hadn't moved. Still sitting stiffly at the table like someone had poured her into her dress and left her in the sun too long. Her jaw clenched. Her hands perfectly folded, white-knuckled around her clutch. But her eyes were furious. And empty. She had no words. Because what could she say to a room full of people who had just stood for the very thing she'd spent years undermining? I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't need her definition of family. I had mine. Right in front of me. Sophie turned and wrapped her arms around my waist again. "You were so brave, Mommy," she whispered into my stomach. I swallowed hard, fingers threading through her hair. I learned from the best. And this time, when the music started back up and people returned to their wine and dancing and chatter, something was different. It wasn't the same old silence. It was a new kind of quiet, the kind that follows after truth echoes off walls that never expected to hear it. And in that space, we stood tall. Unapologetic. Seen. I slipped away again after the dancing started, not because I was avoiding anything, but because I wasn't. I just needed air. Space. A minute to feel what it meant to finally speak and not regret it. The vines were quiet, their leaves rustling softly in the wind. I wandered down a path lit faintly by moonlight, champagne glass still in hand, body still humming from the adrenaline. I heard her before I saw her. The click of heels on dirt. Purposeful. Sharp. Elaine. She emerged like a shadow from between the rows, arms crossed, lips tight. "There you are," she said. I turned slowly, calm now. Unshaken. "You know," she started, voice low but pointed, "what you did back there, that was inappropriate." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean speaking? Telling the truth? This was Matthew's wedding, not some stage for your personal grievances." I laughed. Just once, soft and dry. "Funny. I thought you already used it for yours." Her nostrils flared, but her expression didn't change. She had perfected the art of being insulted without ever looking like it. But I knew the mask now. I knew what sat underneath it. "You embarrassed the family," she said. "No," I replied, stepping closer. "I embarrassed you. Because I said out loud what you've been whispering for years. And this time, people listened." She blinked, caught off guard by the steadiness in my voice. You've always resented me, I said, because I didn't follow your path, because I made choices you wouldn't have dared to. And somehow, I survived. I raised a daughter who sees the world with love and color and kindness. And tonight, I showed her how to stand up. Elaine's jaw twitched. You don't get to define family anymore, I continued, quiet but razor sharp. You don't get to decide who counts and who doesn't. Not to me. And not to her. For the first time in my life, I saw something unfamiliar flicker across her face. Fear. Not of me, but of the truth. Of being irrelevant. She opened her mouth like she had something rehearsed to say, but no words came. So she did the only thing she could do. She turned on her heel and walked away, the sound of her footsteps swallowed by the soil. And I stayed there, alone in the vines, the silence not heavy this time, but clean, open, free. I closed my eyes, breathed deep. Elaine was done. But I was just getting started. The party had thinned to a soft murmur behind us. Laughter drifted through the trees like the last notes of a song no one wanted to admit was ending. Sophie and I sat curled together on the porch of the little vineyard cottage where the kids had been crashing during the reception. She was warm against me, head on my shoulder, blanket wrapped tight around her like a shield. Her sketchbook rested in her lap, open to the drawing she'd made earlier. Just us, holding hands under a sky of hearts. "Mommy?" she asked, voice sleepy but certain. "Yeah, baby? Why doesn't Daddy ever come to family things?" My breath caught. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. I wrapped an arm tighter around her. "You remember how we talk about telling the truth, even when it's hard?" She nodded, tiny. I looked out at the vines, then back down at her soft curls. "He left, sweetheart. A long time ago. Not because of you. Not because of anything you did. He just wasn't ready to be the kind of parent you needed." She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet where I knew she was sorting it, folding it into her world gently, the way kids do with hard things. "But we stayed," I added softly. "We stayed. And we're strong." Sophie turned her face up toward mine. "Did he not love us?" I swallowed. That old sting still lived somewhere deep, but it no longer ruled me. "I think he didn't know how," I said carefully. "Some people don't. And that's sad. But it's not your fault. And it never was." She leaned into me more, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we're still a real family, right?" My heart clenched. I tilted her chin gently so she could see my eyes. "We're the realest family I've ever known." She smiled then, slow and sure and full of something I knew would never break. "We're enough," she whispered. I nodded. More than enough. And we sat there like that, wrapped in a blanket and a truth we both could carry, the stars blinking awake overhead. The world could say what it wanted. But Sophie knew the truth now. And so did I. I returned to the reception expecting the cold shoulder. The stares. The hush. I braced for it. But that's not what happened. The minute I stepped back onto the patio, I felt it. Not a wall, but a shift. People turned, yes. But their eyes weren't narrowed. They were open. Curious. Some were warm, some cautious. But none of them carried that old weight of condescension. Julia was the first to reach me, barefoot now, her shoes long abandoned. She raised her glass and clinked it lightly against mine. "Welcome back," she said. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Uncle Rob appeared next, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I didn't know," he said, avoiding my gaze. "About everything." "Sophie's incredible." "She is," I replied. He nodded. "You're a good mom, Anna, that was brave." He walked off before I could answer. But that was enough. Then Aunt Marie stepped in, hesitant. "I just wanted to say, I always thought you were strong. I didn't say it enough." "That would have helped," I said, not unkindly. She winced, then nodded. "I know. I'm sorry. Not everyone came forward. Not everyone knew what to say. But that was okay. I wasn't there for absolution. I wasn't performing. I wasn't begging to be invited in. I was already there." People started asking about Sophie, how she was in school, what she liked to draw, what her favorite colors were. Simple questions, but real. questions they hadn't bothered with before. Even Rachel, the bride, came over, holding her gown up delicately with one hand, the other holding her shoes. "I don't know the whole story," she said, "but I loved your toast. It made me cry." "Sorry," I said with a laugh. "Don't be," she smiled. It was honest. And I think everyone needed to hear it. As she walked away, I felt it again. That small flicker in my chest. Not just relief. Belonging. Not because I'd changed, but because I hadn't backed down. I wasn't the girl hiding in the kitchen anymore. I wasn't the afterthought. I wasn't the one explaining herself in careful, edited fragments. I was the woman who stood in the center of a family gathering and rewrote the script. And for once, they listened. The car was quiet except for the tick-tick of the cooling engine and the rustle of Sophie flipping through her sketchbook in the passenger seat. The vineyard behind us glowed faintly in the rearview mirror, soft lights twinkling through the trees like the last bit of a dream we'd somehow walked through and out of. She was curled under her blanket, cheeks pink from dancing, eyes glassy from sleep. Her little fingers traced the edges of her newest drawing, a recreation of the moment on the dance floor. Me holding the microphone. Her running toward me. Tiny hearts above our heads like applause. She held it up. "I added sparkles," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's perfect," I replied. She smiled, small and sleepy. "You were really brave tonight, so were you." She rested her head against the window, blanket pulled up to her chin. "Will they be nicer now?" I paused. "Some will, some won't. But it doesn't matter." She looked at me, eyebrows furrowed. "What matters," I said, reaching over to brush a curl from her forehead, "is that we don't stay quiet when something's wrong. That we say the truth. That we show up for each other." She nodded like she understood, even if she didn't fully yet. One day she would. She yawned, then whispered, "I'm glad you're my mom." Tears pricked my eyes again, but this time they didn't sting. They warmed. "I'm glad you're my everything," I whispered back. Her eyes fluttered shut a few seconds later, sketchbook still open on her lap. Her chest rose and fell in that soft rhythm that made me want to protect her from the world forever. I leaned back in the driver's seat, my head resting against the headrest, the silence wrapping around me like a blanket of its own. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was leaving somewhere feeling smaller than when I arrived. I didn't feel bruised or dismissed or like I had to unpack their words in the quiet hours of the night while Sophie slept in the next room. I felt whole. I looked out at the dark ribbon of road ahead. It didn't feel daunting tonight. It felt open. Ours. When I finally started the engine, the headlights sliced through the vineyard shadows, clearing the path in front of us. And for once, I didn't look back. The door creaked open, and the familiar scent of lemon cleaner and crayons welcomed us home. Our little apartment, quiet and still, felt like a place reborn, not smaller than the vineyard, not lesser, just ours. Sophie shuffled in behind me, blanket dragging on the floor, her sketchbook clutched tight like it might vanish if she let go. She yawned as she kicked off one sneaker, the other already missing, probably left under a table near the vineyard dance floor. "Go brush your teeth, baby," I said softly, flicking on the hallway light. She nodded and disappeared down the hall like a tiny ghost in a yellow sundress. I stood in the living room for a moment. Just stood there, soaking in the silence. The mail still sat unopened on the counter. A half-finished puzzle spilled off the coffee table. One of Sophie's glitter pens had rolled under the couch. The window buzzed faintly with the hum of the city just outside. This was it. No chandeliers, no string quartets, no designer centerpieces, but every inch of this space held us. And I loved it. Sophie returned, teeth brushed, hair wild, eyes already closing. I scooped her up, her legs dangling longer than I remembered, and carried her to bed. She nestled in without a word, arms automatically wrapping around the stuffed giraffe she'd loved since she was 2. I pulled the blanket up to her chin. Before I turned off the light, she whispered, "You sounded like a movie mom tonight." I smiled, brushing her forehead with my lips. "Good movie or bad movie?" "Good," she murmured. "The kind where the mom wins." I stood in the doorway a moment longer after the light clicked off, watching her breathing settle, steady and deep. Safe. The quiet of the apartment wrapped around me, but it didn't feel lonely, it felt earned. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood at the window. Below, headlights passed. Someone walked a dog. A siren wailed in the distance, all of it continued. And yet, everything felt different. Because today, I'd taken up space. I'd said the thing I never thought I'd say in front of the people who most needed to hear it. And no one could take that back. Not Elaine, not the family, not the past. I looked down at the floor where Sophie's sketchbook had fallen, open to the page with our drawing. Just us, smiling, bold lines and bright colors. Family. I picked it up, held it to my chest, and let the quiet wrap around me again. This wasn't a detour. This was the road. The smell of toast and orange juice filled the kitchen as sunlight spilled across the tile in thick, golden lines. I stood at the stove, barefoot, flipping a pancake with one hand and holding my coffee with the other. The radio played low in the background, some soft indie song I didn't recognize. Sophie was at the table, hair wild from sleep, legs swinging under her chair as she carefully peeled a sticker from the front of her juice box. She hadn't mentioned the wedding yet. Neither had I. Not because we were avoiding it, but because we didn't have to. It was all still there, folded neatly into the space between us like a shared secret, something permanent and soft and unshakable. I think I'm gonna draw the vineyard today, she said casually, popping the sticker onto her sketchbook cover. With the hearts? Lots of hearts? I asked. She nodded. And maybe you with a superhero cape. I grinned. Finally. Recognition. She giggled, syrup already smeared across one cheek. You earned it. I slid her pancake onto a plate and set it in front of her. She beamed like I'd delivered a feast fit for royalty. We ate in companionable silence, the kind only two people who've been through the fire together can share. There was no rush, no schedule, just a slow, stretching Sunday morning wrapped in syrup and sunshine. After a while, she looked up from her plate, eyes suddenly serious. Are we gonna see them again, the people from last night? Probably, I said, sipping my coffee. But maybe not for a while. She nodded like that made sense. Are you scared? She asked. I thought about it. About Elaine's face in the vines. About the mic in my hand. About how quiet the world had gone after I said Sophie's name out loud, like it had never truly been spoken before. No, I said, and I meant it, not anymore. She smiled, satisfied. Me neither. She went back to her pancake like it was the most normal thing in the world, and maybe it was. Because here, in this kitchen, at this tiny table stained with juice rings and glitter glue, we weren't pretending. We weren't performing. We were just real. She reached for her colored pencils while still chewing and pulled her sketchbook into her lap. I watched her draw. Messy lines, wild colors, a pink sun with a face and stick figures dancing under it. She didn't ask me if it was okay, she just made the world as she saw it. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to change a thing. The sun had started to dip, casting a honey glow across the living room. I sat cross-legged on the couch, a blanket over my lap and a forgotten book resting on my knee. Sophie was on the floor, surrounded by a constellation of markers and glitter pens, her head bent in total concentration. We hadn't turned on the TV, there was no background noise, just the scratch of her pencils and the occasional squeak of her foot shifting against the floorboards. Okay, she finally said, holding up the page. This one's the last one. I leaned forward. She stood, tiptoed to the couch, and handed it to me like it was a sacred thing. And it was. She had drawn us again. But this time, it was different. We were on a stage, tiny stick figures, but strong. I was holding the microphone. Sophie stood beside me, both of us surrounded by hearts. And behind us, rows and rows of people. Some with faces, some without, some with question marks where their mouths should be. But we were smiling. There was no banner this time. No, our family, in bubble letters. Just one word written in big purple crayon at the top of the page, E-N-O. You. I looked up at her. Do you like it? She asked, a little nervous now. My throat tightened. I love it, I said, voice thick. So much. She smiled, climbing up beside me, curling into my side with the kind of trust only kids know how to give freely. I wanted to make it look how it felt, she said. I stared at the drawing again, my eyes tracing every messy line, every bold color. She had felt it too, the shift, the truth, the standing up. The moment we claimed our place, not because someone gave it to us, but because we took it. And she turned it into art. I wrapped my arm around her, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, "You always make things real." She giggled. "I know." We sat there in silence, the drawing resting between us. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, we were still. No applause. No stage. No judgment. Just a girl who spoke. And a girl who listened. And a life full of pages still waiting to be drawn. Together, we were not perfect. We were not polished. We were just enough.